It wasn't long after Monolith was done with Fear 2 that Warner Bros. Announced a sequel, not even a year after Fear 2 Reborn. It was going to be the finale to the franchise, with not only Point Man returning, but also Pax and Fettel, with both characters being dual protagonists in a co-op campaign, along with more focus on multiplayer than the prior entries. The development team behind Fear 3 was Day One Studios, whose previous experience on the franchise were the console ports of the expansions for the first game, Fear Files. I emphasise this because a lot of people mistakenly think that they created the expansions. They did not. They ported them to the consoles at the time. I tried them via very legitimate means and they seem okay. They're capped at 30 FPS and I've not used a controller for an FPS in over 15 years, so I'm not the right person to judge. Although that's the wrong player model being used in Extraction Point. Weird because they got it right in the demo. Anyway, it seemed like Warner Bros. Had a lot of faith in the game since it had a huge ad campaign at the time, including some live action trailers. Fear 3 eventually released, after a few delays, in June 2011, and the reviews? The critics were mostly positive, while user reviews were mixed at best, but the general reception from forums and message boards at the time were less than positive. The people who didn't like this game absolutely slated it. A lot of people, and especially fans of the series, myself included, despised this game. People said the rape in the ending of Fear 2 is what that game did to the franchise. I think what Fear 3 did to the franchise was something the UK government would cover up. Fans in general really don't like talking about this game. Myself, like many others, played this back in 2011 and never touched it again. I'll be honest, I have personal beef with this game. Okay, I'm going to share with you something gay and cringe, but it's to help you understand how I feel about the game. This game actually made me feel physically ill the day after completing it out of sheer disappointment. In fact, I consider this game to be my most disappointing game of all time. It's my own fault, the warning signs were all there, I was just hooked on copium at the time. So after over 10 years of not touching this game, 14 in fact, let's see how it actually stands from a more objective perspective. Two last things to address before getting into it. 1. This game actually works out the box. The only thing you need to do is a small tweak in the config file for the FOV and blur. A higher FOV does mean you see more of the weapon model, with reload showing a bit too much, but it's not an issue. It also throws off the crosshairs, making them look more inaccurate than they actually are, but you get used to it. Secondly, publisher bullshit. I just want to nip it in the bud now, but are well aware of there being publisher shenanigans. There are videos out there bordering on documentaries covering the shit that went on behind the scenes, due to the horrendous mismanagement and decision making by Warner Bros. I'm not going to cover it in this video, I'll be saving it for my next video in the series. Here, I want to focus on the game itself. But to give you an idea of how bad things were, this game was supposed to be Fear 2, but got shelved when Monolith began work on their Fear 2 after their previous project fell through, only for this original Fear 2 to restart production later and get warped into the finale of a trilogy that the developers never planned for. That also meant that there were 3 direct follow-ups to the first game at one point, all made by different teams. All of this stemmed from one rights fiasco. What an absolute mess. Right, I procrastinated enough, let's get into the game. The game opens with Point Man, that's his official name now, being roughly interrogated by some armor camp soldiers. However, Fettel of all people comes to the rescue by possessing one of the guards, in which Point Man sets himself free and returns the favour to Fettel, slashing his throat. I guess he's not happy to see him. Jin contacts Point Man, I'm just going to call him John for now on, to come back to Fairport, so John and Fettel plan their escape to return to the US and find Alma. Why the fuck are they in South America? The game doesn't waste any time getting into things. John and Fettel fight through the prison, which is where you get adjusted to the controls and gameplay, with the game introducing mechanics for both characters, while also having combat arenas to challenge you. Honestly, as an opening level, it's fine. One complaint is there's a lot of grating here on the walls and floor, which you can't shoot through even though it feels like you should, because even the AI try and shoot through them. There's more floor grating later on in the game, but here, you can shoot through them. Some consistency please. The first mission ends with the prison exploding for some reason, finishing with the 2 protagonists going into the obligatory sewer level. Man, when people said Fear 2 felt like Call of Duty, they had no idea what was coming. Fear 3 goes even further down that route. It barely feels like its predecessors, which makes direct comparisons difficult, since it's more of an apple to oranges comparison. Although apples and oranges are both fruit, so I'm still going to compare them. Besides, the game is using the fair name. Let's start with the most important part of nearly every game, the health system. Both Fear 1 and Fear 2 had a simple health and armor system. Armor protects your health can recover through using medkits you carry which can be obtained through exploration. Fear 3 has the same health system that every other FPS game had at the time. No armor, no medkits, just a typical red screen representing your health. Pop behind a wall for a few seconds and you'll regenerate your health back to full. I really don't like it, and not just because it was a popular mechanic shoehorned into a series where it didn't belong. It really leans into the more pop out and shoot gameplay that Fear 2 had on hard. The health regen also makes the minute to minute gameplay less exciting, since managing your health and armor is gone. You're not rewarded for doing well, nor are you punished for bad plays or for being sloppy. Playing badly will just have you sat behind a wall regenerating health for a few seconds, maybe via the new cover system. Yes, Fear now has a sticky cover system where you hit a button and you latch onto a surface, allowing you to pop out and take shots at your enemies. It's not terrible, it's fine for what it is, but I used it less and less as I played the game. The sticky nature of the system felt like it put me more at risk from grenades and flanking enemies, since in the heat of a moment, unsticking yourself from a wall isn't always intuitive, along with the fact that shooting from cover can also be too restrictive for taking shots at particular angles. It's better than the cover flipping mechanic from Fear 2, but I actually think implementing that into Fear 3 would have synergised well. But at the end of the day, the simple leaning from Fear 1 works back then and it still works now, and I'll take that over this system any day. We're also down in weapon allowance with there only being a 2 weapon limit. It sounds worse than it actually is, since you only get a few weapons per mission anyway, with your arsenal resetting after each level, even when it makes no sense. The actual weapon variety in this game is similar to prior entries, which surprised me. It felt way lower. Although the rocket launcher and sniper rifle only tend to get used temporarily for specific sections, which doesn't help, and I'll add on poor weapon balance on top of that. This isn't Halo where you'll be swapping out weapons depending on the situation, with each one being viable in its own way. In Fear 3, you're likely going to stick to 2 weapons for most of the game. The assault rifle that's your medium to long range with the ability to headshot, and the shotgun that's honestly mediocre, but it's still the best close range option. The only reason you'd use the other weapons is when you're dry on ammo or the prior weapons not being available. They're just worse options. The SMG isn't bad, perfectly viable, it's just not as good as the assault rifle. The pistol, same problem as in Fear 2, why can't I dual wield these? You can dual wield the machine pistols, in fact you can only dual wield them. One fatal problem, they fucking suck. Easily the worst weapon in the game. Fear 3 also lacks any fun experimental weapons. You only get one experimental weapon, and that's the arc beam, which is only really good in specific scenarios since the single target damage is so low and it rarely shows up in the game. I will give some credit though, the weapons in this game feel and sound much better than Fear 2. I know that's not a high bar to exceed, but still, shooting things in this game is at least somewhat fun. Still not to Fear 1 levels of course. And while the hindsight's return from Fear 2, they do feel more appropriate here. You don't get that bullet deviation issue, and aiming some weapons such as a shotgun zoom in more like in Fear 1, so you still have peripheral vision. The things you're aiming at though are a bit of a weak point as you'd probably expect. The typical foot soldiers you'll be fighting for the majority of the game are closer to the types in Fear 2 than Fear 1. They're pretty much cannon fodder, are not the competent squads from the first game. I'm not going to get into it too much because I'll just be repeating myself in my Fear 2 review. The same issues I had there apply here. The encounters have a bit of variety at least, in location but also how they're used. There are a few standouts that feel unique and different. One thing I will praise is the return of enemy callouts, kind of. It feels like they're here more out of obligation. Sometimes the enemy will just throw out random lines to try and imitate what they had from Fear 1. Mate, you had 2 guesses and you were wrong on both. They are at least a step up from the second game, and can actually be useful when gauging your enemies. Not only are you dealing with ATC, but you're also dealing with some melee focused enemies to mix things up. You have the cultists, people who've been driven mad by Armor's power. These guys are basically the zombies of the game, a bit unimaginative but not bad. We also have paranormal creatures, creature 1, the scavenger. Not great, reminds me too much of the abominations from Fear 2, although nowhere near as obnoxious. While I am glad not to see the abominations come back, I am disappointed not to see other returning enemies, especially since the game felt like it needed more variety in ATC's roster. There are no flame troopers, heavy armor, or the iconic assassins. But Shazlad, the heavy armor and assassins are replica. It wouldn't make sense for them to be with ATC. Aha, that's where you're wrong. They would have access to these units because the replica in this game are now under the control of ATC. For some reason. This doesn't get explained anywhere, by the way. There are some new enemies with ATC, mainly the Face Caster and Face Commander. The Face Commander is just a big trash talking tanky boy who phases through walls, making the fights more irritating than engaging. Come back here. But the Face Casters take it to a new level. They're like the Remnants from Fear 2, but way more annoying to fight. The Remnants work because they themselves are mostly defenseless, while having the puppeteer corpses being debuffed enemies to balance the fact that they're respawning. The Face Casters are not only not defenseless, not only summon regular non-debuff enemies, but are also fairly tanky and can move fairly quick, just a slog to fight against. The only other new enemies are a few powered armor variants and some new vehicles, both are mainly used for the mech segments. Yes, the mech segments from Fear 2 return, and genuinely, they did a much better job here. My only real gripe are the key bindings. The defaults don't feel great, we also get issues where some keys can't be rebound on controls for the mech. For example, the cover system. Why can't I rebind this? It doesn't get used here. That aside, you have two different types of mechs to use, and they're not just boring cakewalks. There's some actual challenge here with you needing to time your missiles and shields correctly. In fact, let's talk about challenge. I played the game on Fearless, which is hard mode, and they handled difficulty fairly well, especially when compared to Fear 2. You don't die too quick, but you're not a bullet sponge, and even if you do die, this game has the fastest load from checkpoint I've ever seen. You also have the slow-mo offsetting the tougher encounters you'll face. It actually felt balanced, at least at first. The issue is later on, where the game becomes too easy. Wait, the game gets easier? Yes, it gets easier. How? The level up system. Yes, this game has a fucking level up system that's tied to your profile. You level up by points you collect from exploring levels or completing in-game challenges. The more you play the game, the more buffs you get. Fear 1 did have the booster system that gave you buffs per playthrough, but it actually felt like it was balanced, or would account for you finding at least a few throughout your run. Fear 3 goes from a decent challenge to trivial difficulty in just your first playthrough, and since it's profile tied, any new runs will have you already buffed up from the start. Are the buffs really that strong? Well, you get more ammo and grenades. Okay. More slow-mo. Alright. Faster health regen. Flat out more health. 50% max health at max rank on top of the regen. What? The only saving grace is insane difficulty, which unlocks after you beat the game, which I didn't know because the game never fucking told me. It feels like Fearless difficulty did at first, with more limited ammo, but at this point, I couldn't stomach any more than the first mission. I was already max rank, which is 21, for some reason, and this was from just beating the game twice with John and Vettel. Actually, I've not spoken about Vettel yet, have I? When beating a level as John, you unlock Vettel for solo play. That also means you're going to be buffed because of your profile rank from your first playthrough. Vettel is both very different and very similar to John. Let me explain. Vettel is ethereal with no physical body and uses psychic abilities in combat. A psychic bolt, that's just your fallback attack. The ability to raise enemies, that's useful in co-op but can also be used as a stun. The ability to raise and throw objects, a good idea but executed poorly since they can only be thrown from when they were raised. It should have just been like the grav gun from Half-Life 2. And the last ability, being able to possess enemies. Possessing enemies basically turns Vettel into John, but with no slow-mo. You're going to be in possession for the majority of your Vettel gameplay, especially on solo. It's the only real way Vettel can do any damage. I get you're supposed to be more of a support character to John in co-op, but you're just going to be possessing foot soldiers and sitting in the same body for most of the mission, since there isn't much else you can do or many other enemies to take over. The only other enemies you can really possess are the cultists, who have a melee arsenal, and the phase units, which disables their unique abilities, so you're just playing as a big beefy foot soldier. This also makes the lack of returning enemies a double missed opportunity. Imagine being able to possess a replica assassin and gain access to their mobility and camo, or, okay, admittedly there isn't much else here other than more big beefy foot soldiers, but you get my point. Possession could have been a way to introduce new gameplay via unique enemies and their abilities. In fact, the way they handled possession in general is a little odd. You had limited time while in possession as it drains your energy, and it can be refilled by killing enemies and picking up their psychic essence. It works fine for the most part, but I have 3 complaints. 1. The fact that you are constantly losing energy while possessing discourages exploration. I know it's just for points which becomes meaningless once you hit max rank, but still. 2. You sometimes get forced into walking segments, I'm not getting into it, and during these segments you're leaking energy. I guess you can just repossess another body, but it feels like an oversight. 3. You can't collect psychic essence while not in possession. Why? It just leaves me passively waiting for my energy to recharge and not doing much else. It's quite better balanced for co-op, but for solo, it just puts a stop to the proactive gameplay. Oh, one more quick one. You can't enter a mech without a body, but being in a mech with a body already prevents your energy from draining. Mate, just let me in the mech. You can easily get into some stupid nonsense because of this. Having to play Fettel after already beating the game as John sounds like it would be tedious, but to be fair, well, it was, but not because of replaying the campaign. This game is fairly short. I beat this in just one sitting back in 2011. It's only just over 4 hours long, which isn't much shorter than my other fair runs, but they had the excuse of me replaying them a fair bit. Especially Fear 1, since I still play it annually and know it inside out. Fear 3 does not have that excuse. The game is intended to be replayed, so they also added a randomness feature that changes enemy placements and rearranges the map so it's not exactly the same each playthrough, a la the director from Left 4 Dead. Apparently. The thing is though, I did not notice any changes when I played the game. Admittedly, I only did 2 runs, but the only things that seemed to change were the spooks. Yeah, the spooks. The horror in this game is just not scary. People back in the day said this wasn't scary because of the co-op, and co-op horror fundamentally can never work. I think this has since been proven wrong. And besides, playing the game solo isn't scary either. The issue, co-op or not, is the game itself. There's no atmosphere, no tension, just nothing in this department. At least the post-processing effects were toned down. There are spooks, and I think this game is trying to be scary, or maybe they're just here for obligatory reasons, but one big problem, I kept missing them. I literally go into some corner to pick something up and hear a sound cue and see the ash cloud from a ghost behind me, and it happened a fair few times. There are some sections where you're followed by the creep. I'll get into who this is more later, but in terms of this thing living up to its name, no. The section where you have to fight it off is more annoying than scary. Actually, saying it like that might imply there is some horror here. There isn't. It's just annoying. It doesn't even stand out. You'd be forgiven if you thought this was some generic monster, because I sure did. And that's all I have to say about the horror. It's not scary. That's it. I lack any more to say because there's nothing more to talk about. Something I can talk a bit more about is the presentation. It's one of the better aspects of the game. The graphics were fine for the time, but nothing special. Dynamic lighting still managed to make the cut, but the real success are the environments, a big plus for the game. There's good variety here, a prison, slums, suburbs, urban streets, and a mall. What? Oh, the candles! None of these environments overstay their welcome, looking at you, Fair One. And they also get used in interesting ways. The mall with the TV segment being a big standout, they did a great job here. The varied environments also add to the gameplay, with them facilitating different combat scenarios, close range, long range, verticality. Even if the gameplay itself isn't up to par, the environments definitely aren't holding things back. On the flip side is the art direction. We've gone even further into that generic military shooter look that plagued the second game, along with the sci-fi elements, again, sticking out like a sore thumb. It's like they don't understand that these two elements need to meet in the middle. The more you exaggerate each one, the further away they get from each other, making it jarring. The environments are fine, this time it's the enemies. The phase units in particular are guilty. Something else that sticks out like a sore thumb is the UI. It's so odd. Just looking at the main menu, you've got a pre-rendered video which is fine, but then you have a JPEG of child armor flashing in the corner. JPEG armor even shows up during gameplay when you complete a challenge, which not only looks tacky and kinda cringy, it's really weird when a lot of the challenge names are innuendos. Having child armor's face pop up with the phrase "pitch in a tent" or "indecent exposure" is a very bizarre decision by the devs. The tacky JPEGs, low quality colourless HUD, and the intervals intro with text on a still image. This is going to sound like the strangest comparison, but the UX reminds me of a 2000s era Flash game. In fact, I looked up footage of the Last Stand series of Flash games, and in some places, it looks identical to the intros to the missions in Fear 3. I don't know what else to say, some very strange choices were made in this department. Speaking of strange choices, let's move on to the story. Oh, Jesus fucking Christ. The whole game has John and Vettel trying to reach armor for their own purposes, while constantly battling with ATC, who are also trying to get to armor for their own reasons. Not sure what they are. In fact, let's talk about ATC. I thought they were ridiculous in Fear 2, taking it to a whole new level, but Fear 3 takes it even further beyond. I don't even know how to describe what they are anymore. They're no longer a defense contractor with their own security personnel, or even a private army trying to do what's best for the company regardless of the consequences. They are just the enemy now, some military power for you to go up against, one that imposes authoritarian control over entire communities, indiscriminately killing civilians, and is even fighting the US military and is seemingly winning? The fuck? If ATC has this much military power, it puts the events of the prior games, especially the first, into question. Why would the Senator even bother to call in Fear and Delta Force to contain the replica situation? ATC can just send in an entire army and mop them up. Considering how volatile Origin and Perseus were, are the replica even worth the risk? You're winning against the US military with what you had, why bother? And all this for what? Still trying to cover up Origin and all that other shit. This is the equivalent of trying to hide the fact you're drunk driving, so you kill and behead the officers pulling you over. Right, I actually originally wrote, okay no, I don't think so, I think we're past that point now, because it'd be too stupid of a plot element to be covering things up at this point. But then I reviewed the footage. The game flat out states, yes, they are still trying to cover things up. I thought I'd made it up, so I shot myself down, but no, I was right the first time. It's so ridiculous. I don't even know what the goal is, it's just some vague get to armor with some even vaguer to control her motivation. You don't even get a villain for ATC. The game also does a really poor job at getting new players up to speed. If you only play Fear 3, you won't know what happened in the first and second games. In fact, you probably won't know what happened in the third. Even with Fear 2 being mostly a retelling of the first game, all you get is the intro, and very little throughout to set the stage for returning characters or the new story, although even the new stuff is lacking. A big problem is the plot. The cause and effect series of events, it's non-existent here, things sort of just happen. It lacks the "this happened, therefore this happens" chain of events that a plot should have. They've got the bare bones story structure, but no connective tissue that chains things together. It's so disconnected. Let me give an example. At one point you arrive in Fairport to try and find Alma. Okay, you see these contractions emanating from a tower, so she's there, the epicenter, right? No, but you still need to reach the tower, for some reason. The tower collapses when you get there, after which you enter a transport pod which will get you closer to Alma, in which you crash on a bridge outside the city, to now have to travel again to the city to get to Alma where the contractions are emanating from. What? These two missions in particular seem out of order. I actually want to take back some things I said in my Fear 2 review. Fear 2 discards this method in favour of a more generic delivery, with you being spoon-fed story elements. The story structure is just by the books, analogous to other games at the time. I was wrong here. Fear 2 did fall short in regards to the storytelling, but to say it was just like other games at the time was inaccurate, and Fear 3 really puts things into perspective. This game has the most generic delivery of story elements in the series. Here, you have no laptops, no phone messages, no datapads, nothing to build up the story and plot, or for you to piece together yourself. You have an opening pre-rendered cutscene at the start and end of the mission, and maybe some chatter in the level, that's it. I guess this method is better suited for online play, but it just sucks. For a different game series it may be more appropriate, but not here. There is one thing I will praise, and that's the dynamic between the brothers, even more impressive since John is still mute the whole game. That is uneasy alliance, while also having an intrinsic understanding of each other. Vettel really shines here as a character, with him twisting the knife in John while also highlighting the common ground that they have. Genuinely good stuff here, especially since something like this is hard to pull off. Well, at least until the ending. Alright, time for spoilers. Let's do this. So midway through the game you meet up with Jin, who reveals that Beckett, yes that Beckett, has been captured by ATC, who are planning to interrogate him since he knows the location of where Alma is, for some reason. Beckett, however, is not happy. The rape by Alma traumatized him so much it cured his muteness from the second game, and in his rantings, he believes the child needs to be killed as, if it's birthed, it would bring the apocalypse. Also, ATC have only just now got a hold of Beckett, despite this game taking place 9 months after Fear 2, along with this conveniently coinciding with John and Vettel returning to Fairport. The brothers are now trying to get to Beckett before ATC ships him off via airplane, for some reason. Why not interrogate him now? You also have face technology, why not teleport someone to Beckett if you need a special person? Or better yet, teleport Beckett himself somewhere. I guess this technology isn't properly explained, but if you can teleport people into a fight, why can you not use it in other ways? It looks so stupid having Beckett being escorted to a plane in order to physically take a flight to a location by soldiers with teleportation technology. John and Vettel catch up to Beckett, and so we can finally find out where Alma is. However, Beckett becomes a bit hostile to John as he knows who he is, the inbred son of the ghost woman who raped him. However, John really needs to know where Alma is, but then Vettel... Wait, what? No. Are you fucking serious? Vettel possesses and kills Beckett just so that they can find the location of Alma. I was dumbfounded when I played this in 2011, now it just makes me angry. I'm not the biggest Fear 2 fan, but why bring back the protagonist of that game just to kill him for the most bullshit reason? Seriously, John could have just given him an earpiece and tried to have Jin reason with him. They have the same goals, but no, John just lets Vettel kill him. I could maybe understand if Beckett was some ATC goon, but Beckett was Delta Force. John works with them and knows these people are just soldiers trying to do the right thing. Beckett's death is a cockslap to the face, and John's actions highlights another question. Why does everyone in this game act like a massive cunt?
Fuck that! Let the ground swallow him! I want out of here! 5 orders or some dismemberment.
Massive cunt brings me on to the villain of the game, Harlan Wade, or the memories of him. Yes, the memories of Harlan Wade is the villain, manifested into the creep that I mentioned before. It's such a stretch to do this, and it really fucks with things in the prior games. Let's try and unpack this, but if you haven't played the series before, or it's been a while, you might be a bit lost here, but I'll do my best. Let's start with how Harlan is portrayed in this game, since it's very different to the others. He's just comic book evil in this game. I mean, don't get me wrong, he's still a piece of shit. He forcibly impregnated his own daughter for scientific experiments, but there was more going on to his character, and a lot that's up for speculation. Fear 3 delves into the past and Harlan during the experiments on the brothers in their childhood, where he's shown to be abusive and completely obsessed with the scientific results. He's also shown to be abusive with Alma, calling her a being of pure evil. Then why did you have her impregnated? Twice. Him being personally involved with the brothers also makes no sense. I never got that impression from the previous games since they always painted a picture that he was more the brains behind the project rather than being hands-on. In fact, I would argue Genevieve seems to be more involved with the brothers than Harlan was, with him being more occupied with Alma, but Genevieve gets no mentions in this game. It also raises questions how John or Vettel didn't recognise Harlan in the first game. There is some out-of-game lore about memory wiping. Yeah, of course, but even if I accept that, it can only be so effective. Are you seriously telling me that neither of the brothers would have some sort of recollection of seeing Harlan in the first game? If that's so, then that is very convenient for the story of this game. So what's his primary motivation according to Fear 3? Power, apparently. The game builds him up as some power-seeking madman, and not even just for himself, but for the family. He viewed that the family could have been gods.
My family will be gods.
What the fuck? I guess that's why he wanted to keep the bloodline pure. This is the same family he called evil and abused, and he even tried to kill. His motivations make no sense, even factoring out the previous games. The memories of all the evil and maliciousness of Harlan manifest into the Creep, who is the big bad of the game. This could be plausible if Fear 3 wasn't part of a series, but it is, so let's look at how Harlan was portrayed in the previous games. Harlan never got much screen time, a lot was up for speculation, but also inference. Let's look at the final scenes of Harlan from the first game.
She was a very disturbed child. Terrible, debilitating nightmares, hallucinations, hysteria. She never had a chance at a normal life. It was Disler who realized she was telepathic. He speculated that she was extremely sensitive to the negative emotions of people around her. We removed her from that chamber only twice. She was 15 when the first prototype was born. She was supposed to be comatose, but she started screaming when we induced labor and didn't stop until the liquid filled her lungs. There are plausible scientific explanations for everything that followed, but I think it was really just a question of hatred. It is the way of men to make monsters, and it is the nature of monsters to destroy their makers. They want to destroy her, but I think she suffered enough. We put her in there 2 days before her 8th birthday.
Error. No life signs detected.
She died 6 days after we pulled the plug.
Release sequence complete.
This is how it ends. Alma. Ah!
I don't know about you, but this gives the impression of someone consumed by regret, remorse and guilt. Not someone who was a complete narcissist on a mad quest for power, who would come back to haunt and torment his own offspring that he himself feels he wronged. Maybe you could try and wiggle out with the whole memories of Harlan Wade and its perception of him, but that's just cope in my opinion. He was an incredibly flawed person to say the least, but not an entity of complete evil. The only reason the sequels happened was because of him committing suicide, but letting Alma free out of his own guilt. Having him being completely evil prevents the sequels from ever happening in the first place. I get the impression that the whole reason he started the experiments on Alma was to help her and understand her. She was Harlan's daughter after all, and she was clearly struggling and going through a lot of turmoil, being unable to control her psychic powers. Obviously, somewhere down the line, things went onto a dark path, and there isn't any forgiveness for Harlan at that point, but I do think he could possibly had good intentions to start with. But whatever I think, the game had its own idea of Harlan and that's what it rolls with. The final level of the game has you go into the ward facility, the place where John and Fessa were kept in their childhood, to destroy mementos, memories of the past while being stalked by the Creep. This section is shit by the way. The final boss is the big Creep, and again, not great. It is better than the Fear 2 final fight at least. We arrive at the ending in which the brothers are waiting for the birth of the third child. However, we're at a crossroads. Fessa wants to consume the child for the power it has, for some reason, and John wants to kill it as it's too dangerous to be allowed to live. The two have a brotherly scrap, and the ending is determined by who is the favourite child, aka who has the most points gained throughout the playthrough. At least on co-op. On solo, it's just whoever you're playing as. They could have at least had a par score for you to beat. In the John ending, John kills Fettel again, and takes the baby to not kill it? Alma passes away and everything is all okay, for some reason, despite the fact we spent the whole game getting to Alma to stop the birth because it would cause the apocalypse. Fettel's ending is even worse. He's all about the family and how they all need to be a family together, which is why he wants to consume the body. Here, he possesses John and takes the baby to not consume it. Instead, the body he wants to consume is Alma's, in which he devours her. So much for being the favourite son. This is so out of character for Fettel and contradicts what he said only moments ago. So he's killed his brother and eats his already dead mother for the family, which is the theme of the game, family. And throughout the game, Alice Wade, the older daughter of Harlan and older sister of Alma, gets mentioned precisely 0 times. And that's the end. You do get to see the first synchronicity event as a post-credit scene, which is actually the best scene in the game. At least it's not another cliffhanger. But this is it. Not only the end of the game, but also the franchise. The story is just a mess. Even if you judged it in a vacuum and as a standalone, it's still pretty bad, but in the context of the whole series, with this game being the finale, it's abysmal. It doesn't hold a candle to Fear 1, and honestly, despite my grievances, it doesn't even come close to Fear 2. There's no mystery or atmosphere or anything for you to cling on to story-wise other than the third child. No cohesive plot, no supporting characters aside from Jin. Only delving into the childhood of the brothers, which would have been better left unexplored. All of this nothing told in the most generic way possible. All the great execution in the first game that was watered down in the second, drowns here in the third. While I talked extensively about a single player, I'm not going to get too much into the online part. Yes, I know, the game is more focused on multiplayer, but I really don't have much to say on it. I'm not going to do the tired old YouTuber stick of, oh man, I have no friends, so I had to play at my lonesome. I have my reasons. Number 1, Fear has always been a campaign focused series. I know they did have multiplayer, but they used GameSpy, and that died in 2014. There are ways of getting the online to work again, but even then, I want to focus on the single player. I played it in the past and I still play it today. 2, Fear 3 was a full price product, and as such, should have a worthwhile single player. This topic is a whole can of worms on its own, and even I can think of exceptions, but I'll say this, single player or multiplayer or both, this game was not worth the price point, and really needed to offer more, particularly in the single player department. 3, the online doesn't even work? I did tell a little white lie earlier, which was I last played the game in 2011. I actually played it in 2022 because one of my mates, for whatever godforsaken reason, fancied trying it again. We gave it a go and it just didn't work. My other mate couldn't connect, and the one it did work with ended up with a desync after only a minute of play. I'm pretty sure we used Hamachi back in the day. Now maybe we could get it to work, but here's the thing, victory time with my mates is limited these days. I'm not going to spend it jumping through technical hoops to maybe play something that's going to be mediocre. They're just better options for us to boot up. I did try the practice mode for the multiplayer to get an idea of what they're like because, to be honest, there is some creativity here. They aren't the typical game modes you see a lot of, well, except for the first one. Contractions. It's just a World at War zombie defense. There is an interesting twist where you have to leave your garrison to pick up supplies that unlocks weapons, but I played 2 waves and I got bored. Next, Sulking. You play as a Spectre and you possess enemies which lets you kill NPCs and pick up their essence for points. Whoever is in the lead gets highlighted for other players to gun for. I think playing with others, this would be fun for a bit. Solo, it's just boring. The game lacks any bots that actually stands in for players to play against. You only get the cannon fodder that show up. It's overall fine. Sole Survivor. 2 teams, the Fear team that needs to survive and escape after the time limit. The Spectre team's goal is to kill the Fear team. Again, probably decent with others, but boring on your own. I think you can see a pattern. Effing Run. 4-player co-op missions where you're running from a wall of death. Anyone caught by the wall, it's game over for the whole team. Honestly, this sounds like the best one in the group, since it forces people to play co-op and not run off ahead. It's playable solo, although if you go down it's game over. It seems like the best one, but I've really had my fill of the game at this point. Day 1 Studios were given an impossible task, create a finale to the series using their shelved Fear 2 projects in a short amount of time, with none of the original minds returning, not even the composer from the prior game's iconic soundtrack. This game was set up for failure, and it has really little redeeming going for it. I've seen people claim that this is a good game but a bad Fear game, but I really struggle to see that. Even if you have a group of friends willing to give this a go, I feel you'd just be squeezing blood from a rock. For co-op shooters, you've got much better options, even if you just mod something you already own. It was clear that this was a train wreck. This is the only game that got no post-launch support, I can't even find evidence of it ever being patched at any point. It was literally dumped into the world and forgotten about. The thing that gets me is not the game being bad or for being a terrible Fear game, it's the fact, this is it. This is how the franchise ends. I say it only had 1.5 great games and is, in my opinion, still ripe for potential. This is how Fear died.
Not with a bang, but a whimper.
Actually, there was Fear Online. This was a battle release post-mortem. It was a free-to-play shooter with solo, co-op and PvP modes. It came out in 2014 and it died in less than a year, I think. The franchise was so forgotten at this point that no one talked about it or even bothered to document it. There's not even a Wikipedia entry, and the entry on the fandom wiki has huge parts of it written before its release and never updated. It actually ran off the Liftech engine, the one that they used for Fear 2, despite releasing 3 years after the third game. It used the second game as the base, including its weapons, enemies and even levels. Very odd. There's nothing more to say on it. It looks fan made and I'm struggling to even find footage of it. The official trailers has since been taken down and most of the gameplay I can find is PvP. Well, that's all folks. Do I recommend this? Take a wild fucking guess. Even if you have a group of friends thinking about trying it, I think there's just better options out there. Even a modded garage mod would be a better choice. I do have one more video on Fear coming up, in which I'll be rambling about what the series could have been, looking at the decisions the devs made and how they affected the franchise. Until then, thanks for staying until the end and watching the whole thing. After my final Fear video, I'll be covering a new series of games. I'll see you then.